So these bank runs, well, governments would eventually use this issue resulting from fractional reserve practices as the perfect justification to end the private issuance of currency altogether and establish their own national central banks. Now, such institutions were granted exclusive rights to issue banknotes, often backed by a set amount of some commodity, usually gold, which then established a unified national currency. They would also become the lender of last resort, providing liquidity when required and reassuring citizens that their deposits were now finally safe. Although intended to be independent from governments, though, the gold peg provided a bit of a hindrance to governments who wished to spend more than they actually had, especially when financing wars, so something not popular enough to fund via higher taxes. So the supposedly independent central bank could provide the perfect cover for the government to engage in a form of fractional reserve banking by issuing more currency notes than it had gold in the vault. Now, an important event to mention is the Bretton Woods Agreement. Let me take you to New Hampshire, 1944. 730 delegates from all 44 of the Allied nations gathered in a hotel, and two world wars have now taken place. Many economic superpowers were broke, and the US controlled 2/3 of the world's gold supply as a result of net defense exports. A new global monetary order was on the table. That's what was trying to be achieved, and the end result was countries pegging their currency to the US dollar and the US dollar pegging their currency to gold. But the US would soon find itself in financial strain after trying to maintain this global dominance, and 20 years worth of war engaged in Vietnam from 55 to 75. During this time, when inflation was raging, President Nixon took to the airwaves and he made an announcement to the public. What he did was he ended the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Now, this was primarily to stop foreign governments who were exchanging their dollars for gold at a rapid rate. The US likely was not able to meet these redemptions. So, what happened? Well, we now entered the fiat era. Banknotes were no longer redeemable or backed by gold. We had a pure fiat paper currency. Now, the word fiat, taken from the Latin translation, let it be done, but in the context of money, it refers to an authority, in this case, a sovereign government, issuing a currency that is not directly redeemable for a fixed quantity of some asset. Its utility is often enforced by legal tender laws, which require it to be universally accepted by merchants, and the only currency accepted by the government itself for settling tax obligations. Professor Guido Holzmann, if you have time to read The Ethics of Money Production, fantastic book, he refers to fiat as forced money, rightfully so. And if you had any questions about fiat being backed, we'll take it from the Treasury themselves. I'll just read this quote for you now. Federal Reserve notes are not redeemable in gold, silver, or any other commodity, and receive no backing by anything. The notes have no value for themselves, but for what they will buy. So to summarize, the transition that took place looked something like this. We went from gold being traded as money to notes redeemable for money. Remember, the gold was then held in a privately owned bank or vault. We then had government issued gold certificates. We moved on to government issued paper notes once the gold supply was centralized under the government's control. And then we finally moved to a fiat currency once that link was finally broken. There was another major transition that has taken place, and that was turning physical paper into digital information. Now, this again was enabled by the proliferation of digital communications networks, which we've covered previously, the growth of consumer devices, and the standardization of payment protocols. Now, digital fiat comes with benefits to the issuer and processors, namely lower production costs, increased transaction speeds, increased reach, but also increased capabilities for surveillance and censorship. But now that fiat is digital, it must compete in the digital world against other digital forms of value, including those not issued by governments. So the main thing preventing non-government issued digital currencies from taking hold was the coordination of trust required among strangers. Not to debase a currency when the marginal cost of replication in the digital world is effectively zero. So I'll just read a quick quote from Satoshi Nakamoto. No mechanism exists to make payments over a communications channel without a trusted third party. So Bitcoin obviously solved this issue, which was known as the double spend problem. Several previous attempts were made to create a non-sovereign digital money, but each faced their own unique set of challenges. These lessons would all be taken into account by Satoshi to inform the robust design of Bitcoin. One more quote from Satoshi before we wrap up. We propose a solution to the double spending problem using a peer-to-peer distributed timestamp server to generate computational proof of the chronological order of transactions. So, a very innovative solution. What Bitcoin represented was the first and only example of perfect digital scarcity. Anything that achieved what Bitcoin has was always going to be considered digital money. Now, a quote from Vijay Boyapati, because we are living in and have lived through a very fiat-heavy era, and it's very important to recognize that this is an anomaly. It is not normal. And Vijay Boyapati calls it the fiat interregnum. It's the century between the gold standard and the Bitcoin standard. It's an anomaly of history, and it's not going to last forever. So, most of us were born into a fiat world order, so it's easy to accept it as the default state, but it's important to study monetary history to get some perspective.